Good morning, gentlemen. Wonderful to talk to you again. I've got a beautiful painting behind my back, and it's been made by a very nice painter who's known to me, and she's a good friend of mine. And I'm now going to talk to you about Donald Trump. You see, Donald Trump एक बहुत ही यूनिक आदमी है. यूनिक इन द सेंस I will explain to you ये कैसा आदमी है. I think all of you have seen cowboy movies made by Hollywood, Pictures, see Wyatt Earp, Hopalong Cassidy, Davy Crockett. और इन सब पिक्चरों में there is one character who's central, and that is called the sheriff. Sheriff is actually like the head policeman of a small town or village or whatever it may be. And he's the man who enforces the law and order and sees to it that the outlaws don't get out of hand. But there have been many cases of outlaws who became sheriffs and sheriffs who became outlaws. And the sheriff is a central character in all Western movies. आप लोगों ने वो पिक्चरें देखी होंगी क्लिंट ईस्टवुड की, and he was a very famous star of Hollywood. And the sheriff is the most important man. And one of the most famous sheriff movies is Gunfight at the OK Corral, where the sheriff Wyatt Earp met his opponents and shot them dead. So, मेरी opinion में Donald Trump is the new sheriff in the world. Now, in olden movies, the cowboys movie, sheriff was confined to a town or a village. But ये जो sheriff है, Donald Trump, he is the sheriff of the world. And he decides what is to be done. And he believes in the concept of power. और आप जानते हो कि बेकन जो थे, one of the most famous writers of the English language, has written that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that about goes for Donald Trump, and I have nothing against it because he's representing the Americans the way he thinks it. And there are a lot of opposition to him in America, let me tell you. I have got a lot of friends in the American Armed Forces. They are not very happy with the conduct of Donald. But at the same time, let us accept the fact that he does have tremendous support in America for his policies. Now this new sheriff जो आया town में, he has his own gun in his hand. The sheriff used to be always a good sharpshooter. He would shoot with his revolver. And he was normally a very good marksman. So Donald Trump is the same thing. And he has shown his teeth already during the first term. But at that time, he was just finding his feet. And he knew the second term was coming. Unfortunately, he lost that. But situation now is different. This is his last term. And unless he declares himself as a dictator after another 3 years, he'll have to go and sit at home. So Trump is setting up the foundation of what he's going to do after 3 years. I won't be surprised as to my conclusion, which I'll tell you at the end of my video. So आप ये video ज़रूर देखिएगा completely, and you will find out what I have to say. The first thing, as the new sheriff in town, he's enforcing the American concept of law. Now, the American concept of law earlier used to be embodied by the sheriff, and it's doing the same thing here. The first thing he did, as I told you in the first term, he didn't do all this, but the portents were there. And the first thing he did after he took over in the second term is the removal of President Maduro of Venezuela. Now, ये तो एक बहुत अच्छी पिक्चर बन सकती है, a cowboy picture आप सब देखेंगे अगर, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the movie tremendously. And now here was the president of a very big country which has the largest oil reserves in the world, but he did the mistake of entangling himself with Donald Trump. You see, he was a bullfighter, but the matador was Donald Trump, and उसने क्या किया? He carried out a wonderful campaign. I would say, as a military historian, it was one of the best campaigns you can think of. Let's not go by the ethics. I'm not going by the ethics, ये good था, bad था, he should not have done it. No. I'm saying on the basis of the operation, that was one of the most fantastic operations. And the entire guns and missiles of the Venezuelans were silenced. That is number one. That is because of the American infiltration into the armed forces and the top echelon of Maduro's leadership. And number two, he had about 40 Cuban guards. They were all shot dead. Maduro was captured from his bedroom with his wife, handcuffed, put on a plane, and taken to New York. The charges against him may be true, may not be true, but once they are in an American court, they are always going to be proved true. The charges against him was that he was doing drug smuggling and he was infiltrating the drugs into America. I will not contest those charges. Now मुझे पता है कि these charges are true or not true. They may be true, may not be true. But this was the excuse, and he overtook Maduro completely, and now he made himself the acting president of Venezuela. And he had his supporters there. I won't name them. You all know them. You can read in the press. But the main point is that he had infiltrated into the power echelons of the Venezuelan leadership. And Maduro जो थे वो बेवकूफ़ थे. He was thinking that he will be able to survive. मेरे पास चाइना का सपोर्ट है, मेरे पास रशिया का सपोर्ट है. He didn't realize that China and Russia don't have the strength and the power to fight a battle in the Caribbean. After this was done, even the European powers were surprised, but they supported Donald Trump because they were getting scared themselves. Because Donald Trump has phase 2 of his campaign now. What is the phase 2 of his campaign? The new sheriff wants that the entire island of Greenland should become American territory. Well, that's called barbarism. You can call it anything, Gundaism, whatever name you give it, but it is the concept of the American think tank. It's not Donald Trump alone who feel that Greenland must be taken over by America so that they can have a strong defense against any opponents, in particular Russia and China. Now, if you look at the global match, in case America has to be struck with missiles, then the best method is to fly the missiles over Greenland and hit the American mainland. Donald Trump wants to avoid that. He doesn't want to give that up a chance to either China or Russia, and he's going to have a golden globe there, a golden defense of missiles. And for that matter, he has decided, come what may, he will take over Greenland. Now, this has been a great shock to NATO. NATO ने सोचा था कि forever हम Donald Trump के घोड़े पे बैठ रहेंगे and we'll keep riding, and Donald Trump will be the horse, the Americans will be the horse, they'll be running, and we'll be enjoying ourselves. Well, that enjoyment has gone. Long time back, when I'd gone to America and also to Europe, I had told many of my European friends that it is a passing phase, and very soon Americans, whether it's Donald Trump or anybody, is going to realize that we are pulling billions of dollars for the defense of Europe with NATO being in the top. What is the benefit to us? What is the benefit to America? Europe on its own can't fight a single war, I can tell you. Their countries are small, so small that a few thermonuclear bombs and it'll be all over by the shouting. I remember reading, I think it was 1961 when Nikita Khrushchev, first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, made a statement that England will cease to exist if I drop 5 or 6 thermonuclear bombs on my friends, that is the British. Now, Harold Macmillan, who was the president at that time, was pretty perturbed. He said, "Bhai, ye kya ho gaya? What is this?" And Kennedy, who was the president, I think, he told him, "Well, don't worry, we'll do something." So that is the point. These small countries can't fight anywhere, and if the Americans withdraw, they can't battle in Ukraine. And now, he has again claimed Greenland. And I can tell you who's going to get Greenland in any case. Though the Western powers, that is the NATO other powers, are ganging up together, they are having an exercise in Greenland. पर उस exercise में मुझे बताया गया कि नॉर्वे ने 2 soldiers भेजे हैं. I mean, it's just a token representation. And against American might, where he's got a budget of $1,500 billion, uske against nobody can stand. So that is the second point, the sheriff. The sheriff has got his eyes set on Iran now. I'm not very happy with the Iranian leadership, you see. Uncompromising at every stage and talking of Islamic rhetoric, suppressing the population, giving no rights to the woman. And now Khomeini, who is the leader of the Iranian revolution, is in great problem. And I don't think the Iranian regime is going to survive long. A battle group of the Americans has moved into the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. And this force is ready now to strike Iran. I'm sure he's going to strike, but I won't comment on it now. We'll wait for what Donald Trump does. Now we come to the next point, is Cuba. If you remember, in 1962 was the famous missile crisis in Cuba, when Nikita Khrushchev, the chief of the Soviet Communist Party, had positioned IRBMs in Cuba, which could strike every city in America. And John Kennedy, the American president, was perturbed because it violated the Monroe Doctrine of 180 years back. He didn't like it. And he gave an ultimatum to the Russians to take off your missiles. And in a confrontation, eyeball to eyeball, the man who blinked was Nikita Khrushchev. He withdrew the missiles. But he extracted a promise from Kennedy that they wouldn't destabilize the Cuban regime. Now Russia has collapsed. The Soviet Union has gone for a bunt. And now America is caught a cock-a-hoop. They are not bound by any old agreement. And I think the Cuban regime, which is a communist regime, is going to be greatly perturbed of what's happening. I think he's going to overthrow the Cuban regime. And I'm not very happy with the Cuban regime. I remember once I had gone to Cuba, when I'd been to America and went down, and I was really surprised at the amount of poverty there, It was a communist regime, supposed to be a welfare state, but it was like an aging giant, an aging old man, Rip Van Winkle. And I'm sorry, I can't support such a regime there. No dissent was tolerated. There were some good points, yes, distribution of wealth, medical care, free education, but overall the people were poor. Considering the fact that just 90 miles away is Florida and that's flourishing, Cuba was one of the poor states. And the good thing, I think, if Donald Trump, the sheriff, can use his sharpshooters and guns and remove the regime there, and he will do it. Now, talking back to Iran, I think Iran's days are getting numbered. Let us see how Donald Trump does about it. And he's got the support of so many people, But mind you, he's a very, very shrewd man. He's realized that NATO is defunct. It's got no relevance. NATO was spending, I think, 1% of their GDP on defense, and the Americans are spending a lot of money and supporting NATO. And Macron and the British Prime Minister Stammer and the German leaders and the Italians, all of them were sitting on the back of the Americans, thinking that they are very big powers and trying to dominate the world, but now it's all over while they're shouting. Donald Trump is not going to accept it. And if the European Union has to build up their own army, they've got to spend 10 to 15% of their GDP, and their entire economy will be shattered. And they've got another big problem, is that they've got a manpower problem. Young people are not available, and they don't want to fight. They don't want to join the army and do left-right parade and fire guns and all that. So, I think Europe at the moment looks finished, unless a greater leader can come up. Then mediocre men like Macron, who just don't know what the hell he's talking sometimes. He doesn't realize the danger in France from the Islamists, and he's talking of the danger from Russia. Now, the war in Ukraine, I think Donald Trump has got a tacit agreement with the Russians that you can take what you have taken and then stop the war. I think it's a very shrewd move by Donald Trump, and to withdraw himself, to disengage from the Ukraine crisis. If you remember, Joe Biden had gone to Kyiv and he had said, we'll support Kyiv as long as it gets. I mean, he was an idiot. Certainly, he didn't know that the war would continue, and the Russians had tremendous resilience. Despite all the sanctions, Russia has carried on. And now as it stands, I think Donald Trump, who has some admiration for our good friend Putin, I think he's playing a deep game. मेरी बात गौर से सुन लीजिए. डीप गेम का मतलब वो एक इनविजिबल गेम खेल रहे हैं, बिकॉज उनकी मेन एनिमी जो है इज चाइना. So China is the country to be cornered because China has got tremendous manpower, population of 1.4 billion, and Chinese technology is at a very high state. Chinese trade surplus is over $1 trillion. Just imagine that. With America alone, they got a trade surplus of $400 million. So it's a very, very dicey situation. China is the danger. And he knows he can't fight China alone. He may be a very good sheriff, but the best part of the sheriff is that sometimes the sheriff never used to go alone. He used to go with a group of soldiers around or men collected from the town, which are known as the posse, and they used to go with him, and he is collecting those people now, Donald Trump, to counter China. And he's going to, I think, counter China with Russian help. Now, my personal feeling is, and this is my thinking, I'm not, of course, an oracle, neither I am a great astrologer, but I can tell you the Russians are worried. I have been very close with the Russians, and I've spent a lot of years with the Air Force and dealing with Russian aircraft, visits to Russia, anything. I don't want to talk much about it. It's not worth talking. But my impression is the Russians are really worried about China. Internally, they are worried. And the western part, particularly France and England, did a great mistake in driving the Russians the arm of the Chinese. बहुत बड़ी mistake कर दी उन्होंने. अंग्रेजी में कहते हैं ना blunder. That is what they did, a blunder. But the Russians are very scared because tomorrow Chinese can claim the territories which the Tsarist Empire had taken. And the Chinese have got a burgeoning population. And उनको जगह चाहिए. You know, Hitler जो था, he wanted living space for the Germans, which he called Lebensraum. And Chinese को भी living space चाहिए. China is confined to a very small area. The main population of China is in a very small area comparatively because उनके बाकी सारे area तो desert barren है, like Tibet and Sinki.
Dosto writing is on the wall.
Desert. वहाँ तो जाके ये Chinese
and I hope people have seen it. Donald Trump is sure he's going to drive the wedge between China and Russia and try to prolong American hegemony for the next 200 years. Well, goodbye. God bless. I hope you like it. And if you like this channel, please share it with your friends. And I will say,